Welcome to Mad Men, a podcast dedicated to recapping and analyzing the AMC series Mad Men from the perspective of three very different types of watchers. We have someone here who's watching the show for the very first time with us, and someone else who is rewatching the show for the first time since it finished airing in 2015. And then there's me, who's watched Mad Men so many times I want people to go home after listening to this podcast to have sex. I'm Jon Negroni, and Will Ashton, I know I had a birthday recently, but that doesn't mean you should be showing up to this podcast dressed up like a French Canadian with a microphone in your hand.
I don't know. I think it's always a plus. I know it's just an audio-only form, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
No, I don't. How did you do that with your leg? I'm impressed. Of course, we can't forget about Mike Overhulse. And Mike, are you okay? It looks like you have a bloody nose.
I just want the viewers to know, the listeners, viewers and listeners, Mike's got a new mic.
That's right.
Mike has a mic.
And
Mike sounded good.
from New York, it's Saturday night.
I thought you were going to say it's Saturday, Mike. Dang.
Damn it. Okay, give me, count me in. Give me take two.
What day is it, Michael?
It's Saturday, Mike.
And we are finally talking about season 5 of Mad Men. I was thinking about this. I think 5 might be my favorite season. I maybe by the end of like the whole thing, when we're done, I'll have a better idea. But I think this is my number 1 season if I really have to like put it there. But we are covering A Little Kiss Part 1. Unfortunately, so Michael and I, we were like, let's do Part 1 and Part 2. Like, let's just go for it. Let's have fun. Let's be kids. But Will Ashton, of course, was like, no, I don't want to do Part 2. I don't want you guys to have fun.
I mean, it was probably going to have to be just Part 1, no matter what. But I would have been open to the idea of us recording an extra long episode and then just releasing it in 2 parts, like the episode. But it sounded like we only have like the designated time to do it. So I'm just like, well, that makes me feel less bad about having to cut this in half, because I don't think it's fair. I mean, that's like doing 2 episodes for the length of 1 episode. I mean, I guess, you know, on the tin that might sound more appealing, but you know, for the listeners, we're just cutting them off from more Mad Men, unfortunately, if we do it that way.
Well, you know, it's also unfortunate that we are sort of splitting an episode in half in a way. So we got to record these very close together. If we take too long to do A Little Kiss Part 2, that's going to be a problem because these episodes really go hand in hand. But we'll try to figure it out. And so, okay. Do you guys know much of the context behind this episode? This aired March 25th, 2012, almost 2 years after the season 4 finale, and Part 1 and Part 2 did come out on the same premiere date. But yeah, did either of you know about like why did that happen?
I do not.
I didn't even realize it either
John
until I
go
looked
to
into it.
rehab.
No, he didn't. Well, I mean, he might have, privately, but.
I mean, he did back in the day, but I think that was before Mad Men, or Mad Men.
Right.
Oh, wait, sorry. You say 2012?
Yeah, so the
9/11.
Season 4 finale was October 17th, 2010. And then Season 5 didn't come about until way into 2012. And I remember around this time, because at this point I was, following along Mad Men. And I remember being like, it's been a while, since because I remember 2011 came and went and there was no new season.
It's been a while.
But so apparently there was a huge fallout between Matthew Weiner and AMC. I wasn't able to get all the details. I think, and funny enough, Weiner did not talk about it much at all on the commentaries, probably for good reason. But basically, I think I would guess they were having budget issues, and they were having issues because the ratings still weren't that good, but they did have a lot of prestige. Ultimately, the final results is that Weiner somehow managed to negotiate 3 seasons at the same time with AMC. We're going to do a season 5, a season 6, and a season 7. And maybe we'll get more info. I'll do some more digging to see okay, what were the real details behind that. But yeah, if you can look at 5, 6, and 7 really as a TV trilogy season of sorts, because Weiner apparently mapped this stuff out to be the kind of this is how we're going to end the show. So it's going to be very, very considered from here on out, I think.
That is interesting. Yeah, because I mean, there is a similar vibe to this episode to the fourth season premiere, where it's not like it's a total departure from what we have before, but it just feels different. Like there is we don't get to see the same houses. The only location that's the same really is the office, which was only really incorporated into the show last season. So,
and even that has had a ton of changes.
Right.
Like people are sharing secretaries, moving offices.
Yeah. But also there's just a general like upgrade, I think, in the style of the show. Like it just seems like the editing's a little bit different still. Like there's a lot more kind of leisurely, in a good way, kind of leisurely pacing. There are like fade ins and fade outs in a way that I don't really remember a lot from the previous seasons. There's just kind of an ease that comes with the show. I feel like maybe it's just the continued confidence of Weiner and crew, or maybe it's just a desire to kind of match the style that was becoming more prevalent in the 60s in cinema, or maybe it's a little bit of both, or maybe it's neither. I can't say for sure, but it does feel like the show is kind of becoming more of itself with this episode.
Hey, Mama, welcome to the 60s. Yeah.
Way more 60s in this, a lot more 60s costume design that you can tell they're trying to really be fair in terms of like, okay, who's wearing go-go boots, who's still kind of stuck in the 50s. And as always, the costume designer, Janie something, just continues to be really good at her job. But I know you're talking about stylistic stuff, Will, but even on the technical side, this is the first Mad Men episode shot on digital. So this was not shot on film. I think that was part of the deal Weiner made with AMC.
Okay.
Maybe a compromise on his end. Yeah, and also the set that they use for the new Draper apartment that, clearly, of course, that, Megan seems to have designed and kind of put together herself. They're still kind of like, you can tell like they're unpacking boxes. I think in the commentary with John Hamm and Jessica Perret, they're kind of talking about, that they just moved in here. Sally doesn't even seem to like know where the bathroom is and all that. And one of the interesting things about that particular set, to what you're talking about, like the editing, is it's like a very functional set. The rooms actually go into the rooms, like the doors go into the rooms. It's not all cut up like it normally is, like the old OG Draper household was, and things like that. And even the house that we see, Betty and Henry's new house or whatever, that's a real location, apparently really close to USC.
And one thing I really enjoy about that scene is we don't really know until we see Dawn whether that is Dawn's new place or if it's Betty's new place. Because obviously in the previous episode, we knew that they were moving out.
Right.
So there is a sense of like kind of, disorientation that mirrors Sally's in the sense like, in the way that she doesn't really know her bearings yet. We don't even know until we get to the master bedroom which house we're really in. We just see Sally walking around a place we've never seen before.
I always did think that juxtaposition is really interesting, though, of like, especially the first time I watched, like how it seems like Betty has gotten more suburban. Like she's, I think, in a higher end neighborhood. Obviously, more advantages with being with Henry than Dawn and her starter home. And then Dawn, on the other hand, is getting more modern, right? High rise in the city and with his 25-year-old wife.
Yeah, Weiner made the point. He was like, oh, yeah, this is the apartment that people wanted Don to be living in last season, the bachelor pad. But no, he gets this apartment this season because he has, Megan with him and all of that. Fun little fact about like when Sally's kind of going through the house, that song that's playing is an ice skating song, apparently, that Matthew Weiner just really likes for some reason. And we got to talk about the opening scene of the whole thing, which is the protest. And so we know that it's Memorial Day. It's 1966, and we don't know at first like which office this is, but we see like an advertising agency office. So it could be Sterling Cooper, but it turns out to be YNR, Young and Rubicam. And so we see the African American protesters who are picketing for equal opportunity employment and all that. And then we see the scene with the employees throwing the water bombs. Now, an interesting thing about this that John Hamm brings up is that he made the point that like when this episode was coming out, there was some controversy. People saying like, this is a bit over the top. This is a bit cartoonish. But it turns out real life story actually happened. And the reporter that we see like going into the office, like all that dialogue is what that reporter wrote down that happened. And so like they're actually drawing from real history. And it's just kind of funny that there was this kind of like, ruckus over the scene when it turned out to be very historically authentic.
I mean, I was just tickled to see, and I don't even know if you guys know who this is, but Dominique Derrickes. I don't actually know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but do you guys know him by chance?
No, you brought him up in the group chat, and I whispered to Mike and my like we mentally psychically. I was like, Mike, who the fuck is he talking about?
So that's do you guys know Derek Comedy, the Donald Glover comedy troupe they did like when he was at in college?
Yeah, this is like pre-Community, right?
Yeah.
I saw a few of those sketches.
Yeah. So that's the third guy. So it was Donald Glover, and then it was DC Pearson, and then him. Both Dominic and DC were in Community, like in various bits parts. But Dominic, I was looking it up because he's the
one of the guys throwing the water bombs, or
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he's like actually the first guy we see in The Office. Yeah, I guess he became the least prolific of the three because I remember like DC was in like some commercials and he wrote some books. But yeah, I guess he just kind of just stuck to television. I didn't realize that he became like a producer, and like he worked on Ash versus Evil Dead, which I didn't even realize. I watched that show and I didn't even know he had a pretty crucial part in it. And I guess he did some other sitcoms, but yeah, I just did not expect to see him. But I guess this was around the time that he was like still acting, in 2012. So I mean, I figured that I was going to be on an island with my awareness of him, but I nevertheless was very surprised and happy to see him, even in a pretty minor role, all things considered.
Did Donald Glover ever do anything after Mystery Team?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
I heard he changed his name and then changed it back, and then is going to change it again.
I did see.
Oh, he's going through like a Prince type thing.
Yeah. I did see Donald Glover live earlier this year. I don't know if I ever mentioned that to you guys, but that was a really cool show.
Going back to your point, John, I actually was thinking because Y&R is a real company, right? Like,
yeah.
That's when I'm watching it. That's what I was thinking. It's like, how can they do this and not get sued?
Yeah. Well, they brought up Y&R a bunch of times, and I think that there is something to be said about like they use the logo too on the door that you see, and they do not flatter these like dudes in that office at all, and like you see on like the windows, there's like little details of like Goldwater 68 and stuff like that, because we already know. I mean, we're past the presidential election where LBJ won, and so yeah, it is kind of like. Oof. There's like a little sign that says like, oh, if you want money, get a job. And it's like literally what they're picketing for, because like they can't, so yeah,
How
definitely
much
more.
Leeway do you get with that, like with like a historical depiction? Like, do you have free reign to use their logos? Like, what's the ins and outs there?
See, that's the kind of thing that I would love to like pick the brain of like Jennifer Getzinger, who directed this episode, directed many episodes of Mad Men, because they don't get into it in this episode. They have before with like New York Times, like we had to work this out with them. Usually that's what it is like they kind of just work something out. But in this case, they don't really talk about it. I get the sense based on like what they've said about McCann Erickson too, is that they've said that like whenever they talk trash about McCann, they don't mind it at all. Actually, they kind of like the free publicity of like being on this, national TV show. It's like, yeah, it's in the 60s and doesn't make them look good, but no such thing as bad press, as Leonard would say in Community. How many Community references are we going to do in this episode before we even bring up Allison Brie?
Who I feel like she is the one that aged in a good way. Like, I mean, she looks more like the Allison Brie I recognize.
Not according to Pete.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know when we're going to get into the Pete-ness of it all, but I definitely have some thoughts on him. I don't know if we want to get into that now or wait a little bit.
I like how the guy says is like, oh, is that dandruff? And he's like, oh, it's spit up. And then later Jane is like, is he going bald? It's like, it makes you wonder, is like, was that really spit up, Pete? Are you actually spending time with your kid?
I don't know if this is a spoiler or not to say, but I do know, like, I remember this from the time the show was like, even just not being a viewer, but just hearing about the actor that plays Pete Campbell, Vincent
Kartheiser.
Vincent Kartheiser. I thought this was going to start earlier, but apparently like throughout the show, he actually pushed his hairline back.
So according to the commentary, Weiner said that he let them do that to his hair, where they like were literally shaving off patches of his hairline in order to kind of just manufacture that for the sake of the show. So yeah, it's a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but it's not a plot spoiler or anything. Well, but the idea is that over the course of this season in particular, you will notice his hairline is going to be receding over the course. And they're doing that purposely, right? Because, the season's going to be going over a certain amount of time. We won't give that away. But yeah, if your eagle eye watchers will be able to tell.
I imagine it's going to be like Scott in Austin Powers 3, where like every time, you know what I'm talking about? Where like every time
or
we
like in
see
Scary Movie 3,
right,
where like the hat just keeps getting bigger.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the one scene, but there's a running gag in Austin Powers 3 where, because Seth Green is Dr. Evil's son, like he keeps getting progressively bolder, and like Dr. Evil just keeps like freaking out every time he sees him. I imagine it's going to be like that.
Sure.
But we'll see.
Fun fact about Kieran and Shipka, who we only see in a couple scenes here, and I didn't realize this until John Hamm brought it up. He said that as of this season, Kieran Shipka had been doing the show Mad Men longer than she, like more years doing the show and more years not doing the show, because they started her like really, really early. And then the interesting thing about that too is like there's only been one Sally, and he kind of jokes like, this is our 5th Bobby and this is our 2nd Jean. I think it might be the 3rd Jean, because I think we saw baby Jean. So I think he says Jean number 2, but I think really it's Jean number 3.
Okay, so I was going to ask this. This is a different Bobby, right? Or is this kid different?
Yeah, you're not imagining things. Yeah, it's a very different Bobby. I'll look up the actor's name. I don't have it off the top of my head, but yeah, the other kid who played Bobby, I think he went on to do Once Upon a Time, that TV show on ABC. And yeah, so he left the show. They don't really address it or get into it in the commentaries, but it's a long running kind of gag, because at this point, yeah, he's the 5th Bobby, because I think they had a Bobby, I want to say before the show began, they had the Bobby, like the first kind of Bobby. And then they had like the Bobby who like we never saw his face, but he like had to fill in. Yeah.
The bucket over his head.
Exactly. Or like a space helmet, whatever it was. And and then we got like the newer Bobby, kind of the in-between Bobby that was like seasons 3 and 4.
Bobby 2.0.
But we can say Bobby number 5 is the final Bobby. There are going to be no more Bobbies. I know that's, you don't have to listen. You don't have to trust me, Will. I could be pulling the wool over your eyes, but
Bobby Ultimatum.
Bobby 2049.
Bobby Mecca.
But yeah, just a little bit of time with the Draper kids. And Will, I know you were relieved to see that Jean is doing okay.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Mason Vale Cotton is the name of the Bobby actor, the new one. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that was my 1-2 thought when we see that establishing shot of all the kids sitting down for breakfast. Was like, oh, thank God, Jean's alive. I really do worry about that kid, because we check in on him so infrequently, but he seems to be getting older and doing well, and I was happy about that. And then I was like, well, who's this other guy? And then, he goes on like acting like we've known him this whole time. And I'm like, Buster, I don't know who you are, but what did you do with Bobby?
Yeah, he kind of like takes like the little gift and like hits his cheek and is like, are you real?
Right. Who are you?
I love it. No, I think this is a good episode. Mike, do you like this episode?
Yeah, I think this is one of the more like long lasting episodes in my brain.
Not a lot of moments that have,
there's a lot of yeah, obviously the song gets memed. Like that forever lives in my brain. And for no particular reason, the party cleanup scene, is something I think that lasts in memories. But I would agree with you, John. I think fondly of this entire season as a whole. If not my favorite, definitely in the upper echelon. So yeah, I enjoy it.
There are a few things actually. I was surprised. Like you said, the French song and dance scene has been referenced. I hadn't watched it before or anything, obviously, because this was my first time. But I had known of it. I had awareness of it. But I had seen memes of at least 2 of the key lines in this related to Don's birthday, or rather Don's birthday in air quotes. The first obviously being Peggy being like, oh shit, it's June 1st. Like every time it's June 1st, I see someone post that screenshot. And then also the one Twitter account that does the Mammoth thing is very quick to do the any weekend plans. It's Tuesday. I don't know.
Yeah. That's a reason why I like season 5 so much. We're going to have some more moments like that over the course of this season and season 6 too, for sure. I do want to talk about the party, but yeah, maybe we get more of the Pete and Roger stuff out of the way. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's interesting that like you can tell that like Pete is kind of like obviously unhappy, but it's interesting how we're kind of seeing him as like a young Don here. He's on the commuter train like Don was in the first season. He's getting closer to Don's age from that first season. He's kind of become more successful. He's really important at the agency in a way that Don was in 1960. And, Don is kind of moving into the Roger role. Roger is kind of moving into the Burt Cooper role where he's just kind of bankrolling the agency at this point. He's just trying to stay relevant however he can. And then Burt is just kind of like, he's a pioneer. He's an astronaut. He makes his own rules.
I was happy to see Burt still around because it was last episode, right, where Burt made a big harumph and was like, "It was nice working with you all. Goodbye."
Yeah, he's still kicking it. He's going to parties. He's chatting up the locals. It's great.
Yeah, he's imposing the now defunct theory, the domino effect or domino theory on some poor youngsters. That was one of the funniest scenes to me in this whole episode.
The guy on shore leave, Stan's cousin.
Yeah,
he's just like, I thought there were going to be girls.
Right.
Here.
That was so fun. I got such a big laugh out of that scene. That was so funny.
Yeah, the party scene. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just like to imagine Burt going back to like him quitting and then coming back, like someone just mentioning it and being like, "Oh, you're here," and him just being like, "Don't be so dramatic."
Oh,
After being the most dramatic man possible.
I just imagine it was like when I don't know if you guys watch Seinfeld, but the episode where George quits and he just comes back and pretends.
Oh yeah,
he never quit, and it's just like, oh yeah, great weekend.
Yeah, I especially like how, Burt has this kind of like, I'm just happy to be here energy. He still doesn't have an office. And I like that there are still consequences from the Lucky Strike thing. Like we haven't just sort of forgotten everything that happened with that. The agency is still very lean and they are kind of in a position where they rely on Pete for a lot. And Pete, of course, is trying to, like he's trying to leverage himself for more power in the agency. He may be kind of mirroring Don, but he's very, very different from Don in a lot of ways.
I mean, I do kind of appreciate, I think maybe in a lesser show this would be annoying, but I do appreciate the kind of hand waving they do as far as like how they got out of the funk of last season. Like they just kind of just like, yeah, they kind of figured it out. But I think it's implied just based on his confidence, and it seems like now he's in like a higher position, that Pete was like a big part of the reason why this company and this agency is still around. And I think that's kind of giving him a little bit more of a like, fatherly kind of stern mentality. And he's even kind of talking shit Roger a little bit and like, kind of busting Don's balls in a way that I feel like he would be too afraid to do even in like season 3. And yeah, I mean, I think he's still like that kind of nasally, whiny kid, but you can also understand like, okay, he is actually, pulling his weight, as it were.
Exactly. That's what's different now compared to the weaseling Pete would do in the past, where he would want more power. It was just because he purely wanted it. But now he actually does have a reason to. Like, clearly he is good at his job. Like, he brings in business. He's driven. He seeks out new business. He expands current business. He has all the reasons now, it is like Pete Campbell will forever be my favorite character in this show, just because he is the most interesting, I think, to watch, just the ebbs and flow throughout the seasons. But like he's always just a little bit off still. Like he has all the reasons to like want power and he has all this, but he still gets caught up on the wrong things.
Yeah, no, 100%. He just, his values are the issue in a lot of ways, and his reasons for things. But as Will said in the last season, he's the only one working.
Right.
Him and Peggy.
I mean, Don, you would think with him like kind of figuring his shit out that he'd be more incentivized to work, but I think he's even more laissez-faire now than he was last season. It's just that he's like not like drinking and moping. He's just kind of just like,
he's in the honeymoon phase.
Right.
He's having a good time. He's happy. He's kind and patient.
But like even like when he was down last season, there was a hungriness, to him. Like he was like persistent with the clients and stuff. And like Peggy says, like with the Heinz bean thing, he's just like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Whatever, it's a process. Like it's probably better for professional building relationships, but it does suggest that Don's kind of just giving less of a fuck about work now in a way that is concerning. I can see why Peggy's concerned, but I also feel like he's healthier, physically and morally. He's not drinking as much and actually, enjoying life. So I'm a little split on that, but I am happy to see him happy.
You're touching upon really my favorite dynamic of this episode, which is the Peggy side of this. And between the beans pitch and how all that got sold, on the one hand, according to the commentary, like Weiner and Getzinger, like this is a great ad, and they say the only mistake that she makes in the pitch is like when she tries to like talk about the close up on the beans and stuff, and then Raymond quickly is just like, "Have you seen beans up close?" But otherwise, it's a really good pitch. But here's the problem: it's not only that Don didn't come in and close the deal. You can tell that he didn't help Peggy perfect the pitch in the first place. That Don's job in this instance was to take the idea that she had, which was a good idea, and help her retrofit it to the client, right? Because he tries to complain. It's like, oh, of course he doesn't like ballet. Well, Don, it was your job to help Peggy present the idea in a way to anticipate that. And so, like, it's not that the pitch was bad. It's that he was kind of just like whatever about it. And so that's why when he comes in, he's like, well, it's not really, he didn't really feel the ownership over the idea that probably would have pushed him to help Peggy out in that instance. So you can understand why Peggy's a little bit like, man, what the fuck? Like, of course, in the meeting or like in the party, she's kind of like, well, I got to redo the Heinz pitch. Like, she's kind of like Pete in this instance where she's pulling the weight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I was less enamored by the pitch itself. I thought it was a kind of mediocre pitch. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if I actually saw the commercial, I'd be more charmed by it. I think the idea of incorporating new technology is cool. I still think it's kind of a corny ad, but I do, or I guess to say more of a kind of beanie ad, or I don't know. It's not corn, it's bean.
Beat me to it. God damn it.
Yeah. But I do think like 95% Peggy is in the right. But I do also think that in a way that I feel like Roger and Dawn, I think they're still better about like listening to clients and kind of like there's still, I think, a kind of persistence on Peggy's part to like push for something and not really listen to their concern, try to like shoo them away. I don't know. You guys will probably disagree with me on that, but I think she's still, like I said, totally in the right for the most part. But
I think her instinct is right, that she's trying to stick to her guns. With the client, you kind of have to show confidence in your ideas, because then otherwise, if it feels too much like they're dictating the creative, then that's going to like burn you in the end. You can't just kind of like, she's learned that lesson plenty of times with like the patio ad. So I think that's fairly consistent.
I just think that like, even if the client isn't really enamored by a pitch, we've seen Dawn kind of use their words kind of against them in a way, or like not like in a way that's like manipulative, but just kind of like coax them into thinking like, oh, okay, this is actually like what we want. They just kind of need to like see it from his perspective. And it seems like Peggy still is kind of just like, no, I'm gonna, like you said, stick to my guns and just kind of force you to believe that it's gonna work. And I think that's the one way that I think she could still grow as an ad woman. But like you said, I mean, I think she has everything else going for her at this point, and I would like to see her excel, because she, like you said, she's like one of two people in the office actually working nowadays. But I have a feeling she'll be vindicated one way or another.
My cat just broke a vase, and so I had to clean that up. So don't get it.
Okay.
Well, you'll still have your headphones on, so you'll get to like hear us, but you won't be able to come in and be
I
like,
can come in and interject. So
yeah, excuse me, Will, but you are a monster.
I like to think that the cat was just like, no, Peggy was only right. Knocks the vase over. She did nothing wrong.
It was my female cat, so I mean, she's Team Peggy for sure.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I guess where I agree with you, Will, I definitely agree. It's just that, yeah, it's like, I think that Peggy, the problem with Peggy's approach is that she didn't read the client and stick to her guns in a way that would be persuasive. And I think what would have been persuasive is if Don had helped her really analyze that, like, he has this weird, goofy sense of humor. And so you just have to make him laugh. And she says, it's like, oh, well, it's making fun of ballet. But she wasn't properly prepped or prepared or experienced enough to like read that herself. And that shows that like that's where she still needs Dawn, because she's still kind of like learning to bob and weave and adapt, without having to compromise her creativity. And in that way, you could see a scenario where from the beginning of the pitch, she is kind of emphasizing that it's funny. It's kind of, but instead she's emphasizing like, this is like groundbreaking. This is like, and you know, that's why it falls flat.
Yeah, I mean, I could see, like Dawn could be the type of person that would be like, I get what you're saying, but to your older audience that's already sold on beans, this will be romantic, like the idea of like a ballet for the beans. But for the younger crowd, it'll be kind of ironic and funny. So you're appealing to both of them, and then the guy can be like, oh, okay. But yeah, he just kind of just like, yeah, you don't like it, whatever.
Right. Like, and Don would have probably helped her with the tagline, because the tagline is not a good closer to it. Like the art of supper, like there's a better tagline there that kind of captures that double entendre you're getting at. So yeah, we but look, we're not the client, we're just the watchers of the show. But that again, it touches upon a dynamic that I think is interesting with Peggy in this episode. It reminds me of Sally in this episode when she's kind of wandering the house. She sees the kind of naked Megan, and she's kind of just like, you can see that like Sally and Peggy are kind of daughter figures in Dawn's life. Sally, obviously, literally, but Peggy too. Like she's the protege, and I think they're both just kind of looking at this marriage so skeptically, and so like there's just like this unsettling feeling that they clearly have. And with Peggy, I think a lot of it is rooted in this like really bizarre work power dynamic where she's technically, Megan's boss, but Megan is her boss's wife. And so like she's clearly uncomfortable trying to navigate that. And like it's got to be frustrating for her because she likes Megan, and that's how that's the same thing with Sally. Like Sally likes Megan, obviously, but they're also like, who is this woman to our dad, our mentor, or whatever? And like there's just this kind of like hesitance to accept this new dynamic that I find really true to life. It isn't simple. It isn't easy to articulate probably what they're feeling, but it's there and you can sense it.
Yeah, I mean, the Peggy dynamic in particular with Megan, that scene that they share where she's talking about the birthday party, is really fascinating because, for Peggy, there's an understandable sort of frustration in the sense like Megan got elevated in the way that she expected. Like she just married the boss, so she's kind of in a more, creative position, less for the merits of, what she's doing professionally and more just who she married, and it's kind of similar to like Jane just also being like someone who married the boss rather than kind of proven herself and on her wits or professionalism. But at the same time, it's not like Megan's like a dumb or like, inconsiderate person. And also like the office is so male driven and so, just stifling in a very bro-y kind of way that like you can tell Peggy feels comfort in the sense like, oh, here's another woman around my age that I can talk to in a way that I can't like with my male coworkers. And so it is a sort of like, okay, I can't really like trust you, not only because like I can't be fully confidential with you because you're married to the boss and I don't know what you're going to say to him. And also it's like, okay, but you can also understand what it's like to be a woman in this office in a way that, none of the other guys would even care to sympathize with Peggy about.
Let's get into the party. I love this whole like all these scenes stitched together, the party scene. It's the sound design of it is really good. They talked about how they had to do a lot of takes to get the sound mixing right with the band in this kind of small room and like the clapping and how all that audio kind of mixes together. It comes across as seamless, and that's only because they do such an excellent job putting all of that together. But even just like the little moments, it's so cheesy. Like this is the era of Mad Men. I just get so like when I think Mad Men, I think of like little things like where you see Peggy and Abe just kind of like doing their weird little dance in the corner, which apparently I learned from the commentary was totally improv. Apparently they were just doing that before like they said action, and then they just recorded them doing it and put it into the show because they were like, that's perfect. That's like so because that was just literally the actors kind of goofing off and having fun, which matches the energy of the scene.
Yeah, and I love that they play the In Crowd, which is a song I really like and very time appropriate. Just a good it's good vibes throughout, and I love the fashion as well.
Ooh, Mike is here. Surprise. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Michael.
Thanks. And for that, I have prepared a song.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to say Roger.
Willie, Willie, John. Willie, Willie, John, Johnny, Will, Willie, John, Johnny, Johnny, Will. Willie, Willie, John, Johnny, Will. I could go on for 2 minutes if you
Mike
want.
is showing some leg. This is getting a little sexy.
That was better than yours earlier, Will. Mike, I really enjoyed getting to see your apartment or house. It looks really nice. Very well decorated.
Oh, that's all my wife.
Just like Dawn.
The Megan of the situation.
Yeah. Based on the way people describe the Megan song and dance, I thought it was going to be more like Marnie's singing moment in Girls, where it's like this super cringy, awkward, but fascinating scene where it's more just like, I don't know, like kind of sexy, kind of weird, kind of like
it's a children's song.
Yeah.
First of all, that she just apparently Matthew Weiner was really enamored with over the years and was like, I want to make that song sexy. Okay, Matthew Weiner.
All right.
Okay.
I hope that guy has been in therapy.
How that man's been to jail? What are we talking about? This dude has clearly committed some type of crime at some point. Have you seen what he made his son do for this show? Like,
but even outside of the Zubi Zoo stuff, like all the little conversations, I know we already kind of talked about, like just see, it's like Avengers Endgame where you get to see Burt Cooper and Abe and Stan and Stan's cousin just like having this really random, weird political conversation. It's so uncomfortable. And I'm just like, oh, yes, God, yes. And then also like just the little comments people are making, the way that Jane kind of makes fun of Pete, all the like the little thing, like, oh my gosh, freaking Harry in this episode. Will, do you see it? Do you see why we hate Harry
sure.
yet? Thank you. I just
think it's funny to like, like I think anyone listening to a Mad Men podcast is just going to expect everyone to be like, fuck Harry, blah, blah, blah. So I like to add a little bit of spice of being like, okay, I like I don't know, maybe there's something there, but yeah, no, he sucks. Like obviously,
we're doing a show about Mad Men which takes place in the '60s, so I can respect being counterculture, Will, but being counterculture to the point of being on Harry's side, I think is just deplorable.
I never said I was on Harry's side. Don't twist the narrative here. I just never wanted to be openly...
What about all your texts when you're like, wow, Harry's the man?
Yeah.
Oh, no, he didn't say man. He said goat. Yeah.
It did look
like he's like, well, because you love TV so much. And you're like, oh, that's the job I would want. They should put more budget into this.
Yeah. Maybe that's why Weiner was just like, he saw too much of the AMC executives in Harry. So that's why he was so down on him in this episode and willing to make fun of him so often. But
yeah, I love that his joke doesn't land, like where he's just like, oh, Jennifer couldn't make it, she couldn't find a date, and then like Don and Roger just look at him with disgust. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Also Don's accountant, who, what a mensch, he's just like, I'm so honored to be here. And Don's like, who's this? My wife.
Dude, I love that interaction of just like, you invited my accountant? You talk to him every day.
I do think it's funny that she invited the accountant but didn't invite Joan. Like, it's something about that's really funny to me.
Well, if you
put a pin in that.
Yeah, if you saw part 2, but we'll get to that.
We could just do one. There's enough things to say. Oh. Man, you really set yourself up there.
Hilarious.
40 minutes into this, the length of a normal episode of Mad Men. Yeah, we've been
the error you just made.
I don't want to talk about Mad Men anymore. No, I can't do it.
What a true Harry moment.
I mean, I don't know what you guys expect from me at this point, but I think
you're just Ken.
We didn't really talk that much about the Joan scenes. I guess it's a lot of what you're suggesting, like set up for the second episode. So
yeah, we check in. She's had the baby. The baby's name is Kevin. We see the baby's butt.
Yeah, that's the first thing we see.
Yeah. And Weiner said that they were actually pleasantly surprised that they were able to get away with that.
Again,
I bet you Weiner was pleasantly surprised to get some baby ass in the show.
Weiner needs to get some therapy if he has therapy.
John Hamm literally was like joking with Jessica Paré, and he was like, well, that's my butt that they got for the scene. It's just that Christina Hendricks has such huge hands.
That's pretty funny. You know what? That's so funny. That guy should host SNL 5 or 7 times.
He hasn't done it in a while. I hope he does again soon.
True.
But yeah, also Joan's mom. We get way more of Joan's life in this, even just in this part one of kind of like, because yeah, up till this point, we haven't gotten to know a lot of like Joan's life outside the office, aside from, her husband and her like roommate that wanted to sleep with her and that kind of stuff.
And obviously her affair with Roger.
Well, that was more in work, fair.
Sure.
To
Is this
be
the first
fair.
time? Is this the first time we've met Joan's mom? I can't remember another time where we saw her.
Yes, and she is. Her name. It's Christine Eastbrook. So we literally have Christina Hendricks and Christine Eastbrook.
All right. I do like that we can see that there is a sort of tumultuous relationship there, but in a way it doesn't feel like, we're going to have, like a scene where it's like, you weren't here for XYZ. Maybe there is in the next episode, but it feels like, okay, like we've aired our, disagreements before. We're just trying now to like soothe it out with this, baby, your grandson, all this stuff. And I thought that was nice.
Same here. Same here. I guess okay. Back to the party. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to touch on? I mean, I know there's a lot of fun little moments in it, and we talked about the Zubi Zubi Zoo, which is instantly iconic. But yeah, what's your read on the party scene and how it turns out?
I do like the party scene because of like I know we joke about the like domino theory conversation, but I do think like all that is extremely interesting because there's a lot of dynamics at play between like social class and making comments on what the war means,
Mhm.
generation and what the war means, and also with like older generation who have a military record and what like their thoughts are. Like I do think there's like this big melting point of opinions and viewpoints on something like Vietnam.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you add in the viewer's viewpoint of hindsight and knowing what that war was and how it went on. Like I I feel like I could like watch them talk about Vietnam or like have these moments for like an entire episode. I find it like extremely interesting.
Oh, I would have loved if the whole episode was just the party. I would have been overjoyed.
Big chunk. Mike, were you upset though when Abe, the character you hate, had all of the correct opinions about the riots in Vietnam and stuff?
Yes, John. In fact, I was. I really just hate Abe. I do not think Abe is a good person, but
He's
I
just
think that's
smug about being right. He's a real
that's it.
Ramses.
That's it exactly. Like, yes, he is right, and but it's like, is he right though, or does he know the right things to say, and he's just like posturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he
I
had that scene in the last season, right, where he was just, he was kind of putting Peggy down for like women's empowerment. Get out of here.
I was hoping there would be a scene towards the end of the party where we see a very drunk Cooper and a drunker Abe like getting along and singing and like
Make
Right,
out.
right.
love and
Yeah,
or making
karaoke.
out. Yeah, yeah.
Well, no, because they both love Japan, so they would kind of like bond over manga or something.
They
You're
both
saying that they're saying like whatever the '60s equivalent of K-pop is together.
Yeah, yeah, J-pop, but yeah.
Sorry, J-pop. Sorry, J-pop.
they bond over like they both really hate wearing shoes. Like
Yeah. Yeah, they both are into hentai, who knows. But
They bond over their shared love of the Fountainhead.
well, no, I don't think I wouldn't say Abe's an objectivist, but
Well, I didn't say he was. I'm just saying that he liked the book, and then
why would he like the book if he's that doesn't make any sense.
maybe he likes it for different reasons, but that's just his in for getting with Cooper, or maybe he lies. I don't know.
here's just another. Abe talks about this in episode 2. Will oh my goodness.
Careful, Mike, you're starting to be a little bit Abe-ish.
You know what, John? That's the rudest thing you ever said to me.
That was a horrible joke, by the way.
I was really pushing that. I do want to say the psychology of Megan with this party, doing something that clearly she's been warned about. That Don has said, like, he doesn't like parties, doesn't like celebrating his birthday. And of course he doesn't. He doesn't want to draw attention to his birthday because it's not his real birthday. It obviously causes a lot of issues with him, trauma for him. And we do learn in this episode that Megan knows about the Dick Whitman stuff. Like, so we get that right off. And I think that she, that's obviously part of Don realizing his mistake of not telling Betty and, understanding well, I think actually Don kind of maybe scapegoating that as the reason things with him and Betty were demolished, as opposed to his constant infidelity and disrespect toward her. But yeah.
Tomato, tomato.
Right. But he scapegoats it to like, oh, she just looks down on me because I was Dick Whitman. And that anxiety of his is like his number one foil. But with Megan, he tries to get ahead of it.
Granted, it does suggest that he's trying to be more open and honest with his new wife in a way that he never would have been with Betty unless pushed to be so. So
sure, he's doing the right thing and for a good reason. But yeah, I don't think he's totally learned all the right lessons from why his previous marriage failed.
Well, I mean, he wouldn't be Don if he didn't learn all the right lessons, I don't think. But I mean,
100%, yeah.
Yeah, but I think I will say I went into this episode expecting it to be a lot darker in that respect than it ultimately was. Like, I didn't expect them to be as enveloped in the honeymoon phase as they were last time. Like, I thought there was going to be more of a stark, like, this is Tomorrowland, this is them in Disney World, this is now them in the real world, and the reality of it hits. And obviously, you guys are probably going to be like, well, you should have watched part 2, and then you would know. But and and then maybe the end scene here suggests that that's the case, because obviously we see a forlorn look of pension on Megan's face. But I do think it seems healthier on the onset watching only this episode than I would have expected going into this.
Well, even just in this episode, you can kind of see like there are a lot of warning signs. Megan is in such an uncomfortable position. Her whole life is being controlled by this man. And that's why I see this party as like kind of her own form of rebellion and protest of her being like, I want to have some control. I want to surprise him. I want to basically do something for myself, because like she works with this guy. She sees him all day. Like clearly she's in love with him. But yeah, there's also a little bit of that tension of like, she doesn't really get to, be herself totally. And so I think she's using this party as a way to kind of like create that opportunity to also find some belonging with all these people who were, have known each other for a long time. She wants them, like even that little line about like, I want people to have sex when they get home, like I think that she's like that kind of personality where she's like, people are going to like me if I do great things, nice things for them. And that's her psychology, it sounds nice, but it's also rooted in a lot of deep insecurities for her.
Sure. I do think it is fascinating that in the beginning of the episode, all of the Dawn kids call her Megan instead of like mom or stepmom or something. It's just because I mean they were introduced to her. Well, they introduced to her as Megan,
right?
So it's not like I mean I guess I'm not saying that was like a huge red herring. I just thought that was just kind of interesting that there's still that kind of barrier between them.
Yeah, especially when like both parents are still in the picture too. It's like I think it's more abnormal, I think, for kids unless they like know the step parent from like birth.
We don't see Betty or Henry in this part 1, so I'm very curious if they'll show up in part 2.
Well, maybe if you no, I'm just I know. No, they're actually not in part 2. I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
So you'll have to wait a little bit longer. Sorry.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Anything else before you guys want to get into a few trivia stuff?
Are we not going to talk about the end?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, but yeah, I mean they have a little bit like, yeah, I think the expected Dawn is just kind of like, I don't like this. Meh.
I'm 40. I'm going to bed. I'm tired.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else I have left to say about this. I'm excited for part 2.
Sure. Let's get into trivia. So Jessica Parry's version of Zubi Zubi Zoo is available on streaming services, I believe. I think you can listen to it since it's a cover. It was also there is a French version of it too, if that's what you prefer.
Well, she does sing it in French, so
I think like a better version of French. I don't know.
Okay.
Ralph Nader is briefly mentioned over something going on with Oldsmobile.
Yeah.
Interesting kind of I don't know a ton about Ralph Nader besides like the 90s stuff, so that's always kind of it tickles me because I'm like, oh yeah, the guy was very old when he was running for president. Don tells Sally to, quote, give Morticia and Lurch my love, referring to the Addams family castle like look of Betty's new house in Rye. Will's snapping, and then he does make another joke about this, I think, in a different episode, but I'm not going to spoil that for you, Will.
Okay.
Don tells Megan that he's been 40 for half a year already, which is a continuity error. Lieutenant Don Draper was 9 years older than Dick. So I think this trivia is wrong. The idea is, so if you're paying attention to the show, he takes the man's birthday so that he can get the driver's license, but he changes the year. So it's same day, different year. Part of this, I think you can chalk up to young Don kind of being an idiot and not just trying to get away with something in the short term and not thinking for the long term. So not a continuity error. I think that's just, yeah.
Oh, Don.
So in the scene where, so we meet that guy on the train. We didn't talk about him too much, but he's the one who's kind of like annoyed with his wife and everything. And he said, "Oh, my wife's asked me what I do all day." So that's a reference, and Weiner brings this up to Weiner's first film, which is called "What Do You Do All Day," which is supposed to be, I believe, about that kind of thing of what do writers do all day. And so, speaking of therapy, the set that they used for the meeting with Mohawk Airlines. I mean, we didn't really talk about Mohawk. They're back theoretically. Henry Lamont, the airline that in season 2 they kind of ditched so that Duck could curry favor with the American Airlines to no avail.
I did. I forgot to mention earlier, Pete giving himself the nosebleed as he was so frustrated about Claire and Roger was really funny to me as well.
That's a great scene. Just great slapstick humor. A really good stunt filmmaking too. But anyway, so the set that they used for the meeting with Mohawk Airlines actually was in literally that area between Roger and Don's office. They just redressed it for the scene. So if you pay close attention, you can actually kind of tell it is the same set. So it's just funny, the magic of filmmaking, I guess, or TV making. Roger saying, "My mother always said never show up empty-handed." And ruining the surprise for Don was inspired by something that actually happened with John Hamm. He showed up a month early to a surprise party, and he said that exact line to the person that answered the door, and it worked. So I guess that was just something that he kind of slipped into the episode with Matthew Weiner. In the surprise party scene, the group that Megan is laughing with is because one of the guys was doing a Minnie Mouse impression. I think that was revealed in like an interview at some point, which I can't do Minnie Mouse, but I can do Mickey Mouse. If
that's true.
Yeah. I won't do it. Too loud.
Do it.
In the season 5 commentary track, Jessica Paré says that her favorite part of rehearsing the Zubi Zubi Zoo scene was that Matthew Weiner would go through the whole dance routine as Megan and do all the moves. I mean, yeah. Do we even need to,
I mean, that kind of reminds me, like, you ever watch like the behind the scenes for Pulp Fiction where they're doing the dance at the diner and you see Quentin Tarantino's also doing the dance behind the monitor? That kind of has the same vibe to it, I feel like.
Yeah, but one of those is cool and one of them involves a weirdo.
Okay. I mean, technically they're both weirdos, but I'll give you that Tarantino is cooler about it.
Yeah. I mean, the scene is way cooler. You kidding me?
All right, and that's all I got for trivia. Fun episode, but obviously we'll have more to talk about in part 2. And until then, though, guys, it's been fun, but it feels a little bit premature. I don't know.
Should we do a proper send-off, or should we do it with a cliffhanger?
A cliffhanger? What are you talking